How scared I was just then. Okay, this just took like an hour longer than it needed to because my computer totally broke. It had signed me in a temporary profile. I couldn't get any of my documents. I had to Google the problem. It was awful. Just don't turn your computer off by the button when you get annoyed with it when it breaks, okay? Because that's what I did, and it completely decimated the entire thing until I restarted it 3 times. From one topic that annoyed me to another one. This is a video about Wuthering Heights, one of my favourite books ever, Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. It concerns a house named Wuthering Heights in the 1900s and the occupants of that house, mainly Heathcliff, who was brought in as an orphan to live with a family there. Hello. Hello, Bumpus. Hello. Hi. Look who's here. My Aldana. It's a classic. It is a ghost story. It is about the love story between Cathy and Heathcliff and all of the problems that arise later on from their relationship, basically. And I've noticed that it gets a lot of hate on BookTube, more so than a lot of classics, and more so than just a lot of books. And people have very good reasons for disliking it. I really like the characters, even though they're horrible characters. So I'm just going to make this video because I was watching Kristen from Vienna Waits Books, and it was her unpopular opinion book tag, and she was saying that she really likes this book. When she first read it, she didn't, but then looking back on it, she did. And I was saying I really wanted to make this video just to sort of maybe give you a different perspective on this book. Now, stop me if you've heard all of this in your GCSE or whatever Americans call it lessons when you're studying this book. This might be like a patronising video where you say, I know all of this and I still hate it. And if you do, fair enough. You do you. I love this book, and I'm just going to tell you why I think people might be going into it wrong, or that we're sort of marketing the book itself wrong. Yeah, I've written down all my thoughts like this. This is new for me. I tend not to write notes like that, and these are pretty much almost like an essay of what I'm going to say. Because I really want to be more concise in my reviews and stuff. Because when I was doing my wrap up, there were parts of books that I really enjoyed but I didn't even mention because they just didn't occur to me. And so I'm trying to be more concise. So if you prefer this way of me doing this, when we get into my thoughts, please let me know. Okay, so Wuthering Heights. Here we go. Wuthering Heights, first and foremost, people hate it because of the characters. And that is the first thing that I'm going to discuss. It's going to go characters, love story, the Heights. So, first of all, we have Heathcliff and Cathy. I think that the problem with having unlikable characters is that people who haven't read the book just hear about how much people love Heathcliff and Cathy, and when they read it, they say, these characters are horrible, I don't understand why people love them. I think that the problem is that people might not realise when they first go into it that they are meant to be horrible. They're meant to be awful. I personally still like them, but I like Cersei Lannister, so, you know, I'm probably a little bit biased towards villains anyway, but they are essentially very horrible characters and do selfish things. But that's okay, and it's okay to like them, because we know that they're horrible, and they're meant to be horrible. It's essentially a book that showcases how race, class, and gender divides affect people, and how unkindness can have consequences, and how these these prejudices can also have consequences later on, unforeseen consequences. Heathcliff is a dark-skinned, possibly Romany orphan who is brought in to live with the Earnshaws. So you already have the fact that he's essentially a nobody, so it's the class divide, and you have the fact that he is described as having dark skin, so he could either be... It's not explained properly. It's just said that he's got dark skin, but that simple fact probably means that he probably is not white. And then he loses everyone that he loves because he loses his adoptive father, and then he loses Kathy, or he sees himself as losing Kathy, and then he's treated like a servant, and he's essentially abused and kept in very abusive conditions. Now, I'm not saying this justifies any of his actions. I'm a firm believer in, just because there's a reason doesn't mean you should do it. Just because you have a reason, you shouldn't do all the terrible things that you're gonna do. But it does explain it, and in a society where we watch things like the Avengers and we love Loki, I mean, I don't, but people do, I find it very interesting that there are some things that people manage to justify and then others that they don't. I don't try and justify anything that Heathcliff does, but I understand how it's come to be. Then we have Kathy. Kathy is essentially the spirit of the Heights. She's unruly and free, as she describes it, when she's younger. And she's an important character because she shows how women are supposed to cosset themselves and corset themselves in a way in order to fit in with society and in order to survive. The only reason she marries Linton is to survive, and she becomes someone who she doesn't want to be. This is also quite reminiscent of the idea that the Brontes had to pretend to be men in order to even get these books published. They know all about women being controlled, and that is what Kathy is showing. That it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. She shouldn't have been controlled like that, and it kind of resulted in a lot of terribleness, basically, and made her extremely unhappy. And when she dies because of a result of childbirth, which is another thing that was rife in that time. And again, that speaks to femininity and the things that females were expected to do. I love these characters. I know they're horrible, but I love them because Bronte doesn't try and justify them. It's the reason that Heathcliff does not survive in the end. Hareton and Catherine are actually the ones that you root for in the end, because it becomes a novel about good triumphing over evil. I think this book is also marketed wrong. To quote 500 Days of Summer, it is not a love story. It is a story about love. It's cited as being one of the greatest love stories of all time, but I don't think that it is, and I think that people hear this and expect something different when they read the book. What are you doing? Cat struggles. The true love story of this book is not Kathy and Heathcliff, but it's Catherine and Hareton and their kindness and them overcoming the tragedies that have befallen them because of Kathy and Heathcliff. And it's also the love story of the Moors. So this is not a love story. Then what is it? I'll tell you what it is. It's a revenge story. In the beginning, a villain origin story, and then it becomes a revenge story later on. And it's the downfall of that villain. So it's in 3 parts. Heathcliff, it is his villain origin story. It's not a love story. It's not to show Heathcliff and Kathy's love story. It's about him setting a 20-year revenge plan in motion. I think that if it was marketed as a gothic revenge story rather than a romance, people would just love it because that's what it is. And they would go into it knowing that it's going to be almost a thriller, almost a revenge thriller, to see whether he completes his evil plan. Okay, so the other problem with marketing is, of course, the films. Many people who might have only seen the films, or they might have seen the film beforehand, the films do not help it at all. One of the most famous versions that I've seen that I don't like is the 1935 or 45 version with Laurence Olivier in it. This is probably the worst version because it cuts everything out. It cuts out the beginning and the end, and it shows you the middle, which is Kathy and Heathcliff and their childhood and her marrying and up until her death. That's where it ends, which is ridiculous to me because it's essentially the middle of a book without the beginning of the end. You have no context whatsoever, and you don't understand what happens later on because you don't find out. And the whole thing is focused on Heathcliff and Cathy, when in actual fact, that is simply a catalyst. Cathy's death is a catalyst for what happens later on. It's not the main point of the novel by any means. It's actually just one small plot point, but a very important plot point in a much longer book. So when films focus for ages on that one part, you're not then focusing on what it does to Heathcliff and the character development that's there. By cutting out the end, you cut out any resolution, and you also cut out the hope at the end of the book that you find in Hareton and Catherine, that they can move on with their lives and be better people, and that they're not going to experience the darkness that came with the Heights, and that the Heights is now free of those ghosts, or at least it has its ghosts in Catherine and Heathcliff, and they're not going to hurt any more people, is like the ending, or is how I see the ending. And when you don't focus on that, and when you belittle that, you kind of lose the entire resolution of this whole book while you've read it, because that's what you want at the end. You read all this horrible, tragic stuff in order to get the goodness and the overcoming of the evil in the end. Other versions, like the Tom Hardy version, are slightly better than this, though that is a mini-series, so it did have longer, but there's still a tendency to try and justify Heathcliff and play him as this sort of sad little puppy, and play him rather pathetically, instead of playing him as horrible as he actually is, because he is horrible. I mean, I love him, but he's mean. He's not good. And they kind of focus, yes, on his emotion, because he's a very emotional, passionate character, but then they kind of shy away from the fact that he does murder and kill and beat women, which he does do, but they like to play him off as a brooding hero, and then when people read the book, they realise that's not what he's actually like, and it kind of is a bit, why have they done this, and why have people set it up to be that kind of love story when it's not. He is not Mr. Rochester, he is not Mr. Darcy, he is an island unto himself. It's also a ghost story, set on the beautiful Yorkshire moors, which I have been to many a time because I am from Yorkshire. It's essentially a love letter to those moors. The spirit and the beauty of the moors, the wildness of the wind, is found in its characters. It also, as I said, takes into account religion, class, gender, race, and that gives the book a much wider scope. You are seeing and focusing on one small house in the Yorkshire moors, a very important house, of course, the Heights, but it's a much wider novel than that. It's a novel talking about society and the effects of society, and I think that people focus so much on the main characters that they forget that there's a wider scope to it and a wider meaning to it. And I think that if we actually marketed it as such, it would not surprise people so much that that's what it's about, or people might go into it and understand that a bit more and be able to take more from it, more than just the characters, because it is more than just the characters. So I hope that was okay. I tried to follow my notes. Sometimes I obviously went off on it a bit more, but you might still say to me, I literally knew everything that you just said and it doesn't change my opinion. That is fine. I just wanted to talk about how society I don't think is necessarily viewing the book correctly, or they're not sort of taking certain points from it that might make them enjoy it a bit more. And I love this book, so I kind of wanted to spread some love for it, basically. And I hope that you like it. I hope that maybe this gives you a new perspective on the book. Maybe you want to reread it. Maybe you still hate it, which is also fine, like I said. But yeah, I wanted to just talk about it because I love it. So thank you for watching, and hopefully I haven't scared you off, and I will see you again soon.